Welcome. This channel brings you daily motivation and uplifting sermons. Subscribe now. And together let's reach 1,000 subscribers while building a positive, inspiring community. The night was still, yet in the Washington household, a quiet, fervent conversation hummed like a prayer whispered into the wind. Young Denzel sat at the kitchen table, his hands clasped together tightly, his brow furrowed. The flickering candlelight from the counter reflected his mother's wisdom-filled eyes as she leaned forward. Her voice gentle but firm. "Denzel," she said, "you can't keep going on like this. You've got to give it to God." Denzel raised his head, his expression weary. He was no stranger to hard work. Ever since he had started chasing his dreams, he had done everything. He could think of auditioning for plays, taking small acting gigs, studying his craft relentlessly, and yet, time after time, the doors refused to open. The rejection letters felt like heavy stones, each one weighing down the hope he clung to so desperately. "What does that even mean, Ma?" he asked. "What do you mean? Give it to God." "I'm trying everything. I'm doing all I can. What more can I do?" His mother smiled, a patient, knowing smile that comes from decades of faith and experience. She reached across the table, placed her hands on his, and spoke softly. "It's not about giving up, baby," she said. "It's about letting go. Let go of the fear. Let go of the control you think you have. You're working hard, and that's good. But you're trying to do it all on your own, and that's not how it works. Faith isn't just about asking for help when you're in trouble. It's about trusting that God's got your back even when you don't have all the answers." Denzel sat back, letting her words sink in. He wasn't sure he fully understood. How could he not worry? How could he not fight to make things happen? But as he looked at his mother, this woman who had weathered storms and never lost her faith, he felt a quiet sense of assurance. Maybe there was something to what she was saying. Maybe he didn't have to carry everything on his shoulders. "I'm not saying you stop working hard," she continued. "You keep putting in the effort, but you don't let the weight of it crush you. You don't let the fear of failing hold you back. You pray. You tell God what's on your heart, and then you trust Him. You trust that He knows where you're going, even if you don't see it yet." That night, after his mother had gone to bed, Denzel stayed at the table a while longer. The candle's flame had burned low, but its glow still warmed the room. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. It felt awkward at first. Praying wasn't new to him, but praying this way, truly letting go, was different. "God," he murmured, barely audible. "I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know if I'll ever get there. But I'm tired of being afraid. I'm tired of feeling like it's all on me. So, I'm giving it to you. I'm trusting you." When he opened his eyes, the room felt no different. The rejection still lingered in the air, and his dreams still seemed as distant as ever. But something deep inside him had shifted, almost imperceptibly. It wasn't an instant transformation. It wasn't the sudden arrival of success or the disappearance of all his struggles. Instead, it was a whisper of peace, a small flicker of hope that wasn't there before. As the candlelight faded and Denzel headed to bed, he knew he had taken a first step, not a leap, not a sprint. Just a small step towards something greater. He wasn't carrying it alone anymore. He had given it to God. The room was small, with bare walls and a single chair in the corner. Denzel stood in the center, facing a panel of indifferent faces. His palms were slick with sweat, his heartbeat steady but heavy in his chest. He had rehearsed this scene dozens of times. He had imagined what he would say, how he would walk, how he would bring the lines to life. He had envisioned the smiles of approval, the polite nods, the moment when someone on the other side of the table would lean in and say, "Yes, that's him. That's the one we're looking for." But this was not that moment when the panel of casting directors thanked him for his time and said they would be in touch. Denzel knew what they really meant. He had heard it enough to recognize the tone, the subtle shift in energy. That signaled the polite rejection. As he gathered his things and walked out into the cold air of the parking lot, the weight of another no settled onto his shoulders. He sat in his car, staring through the windshield at nothing in particular. This had become routine. He would show up, give his best performance, and leave empty-handed every time. The journey back home felt a little longer, a little heavier. But there was a difference now. He still felt the sting of disappointment, but it no longer cut as deep. In the quiet moments, when frustration threatened to boil over, he remembered his mother's words, "You've got to give it to God." He had started to carry that phrase with him everywhere, not as a magic spell that eliminated his struggles, but as a steady, unshakable reminder that his path wasn't his alone to figure out. And so, instead of pounding the steering wheel in anger or sinking into despair, Denzel took a deep breath and closed his eyes. "Lord," he whispered, "I know you see what I don't. I know there's something better coming. Just help me keep going. Help me trust you." It wasn't that he suddenly felt lighter or that the rejection stopped hurting altogether, but he could sense that his spirit was slowly becoming more resilient. Instead of seeing each no as a failure, he started to see them as part of a larger story, a story still unfolding. The valley of rejection stretched out before him, vast and uncertain. Each step felt as though it took him deeper into that shadowed place, where nothing seemed to grow. And yet, he kept moving. He kept showing up, audition after audition, rejection after rejection. He stayed the course. He didn't let the fear of hearing no stop him from trying again. Some nights were harder than others. There were moments when he wondered if he was fooling himself. But whenever those doubts surfaced, he would think back to that simple prayer at the kitchen table. He would remember that his role was not to control the outcome, but to show up, to give his best, and to leave the rest to God. And slowly, over time, a shift began. It wasn't something dramatic or sudden. It was subtle, like the first rays of dawn creeping into a dark sky. The no's still came, but Denzel's reaction to them was different. He started to see rejection not as a dead end, but as part of the process. Each closed door became a reminder to keep trusting, to keep moving forward. As he walked through the valley of rejection, he discovered a quiet strength. It didn't come from his own determination alone. It came from knowing he wasn't walking that path alone. It came from faith And in that faith, he found the courage to keep going. One step at a time, even when the way forward was unclear. The cold metal chair pressed against Denzel's back as he sat outside yet another audition room. He was older now, more experienced. He'd learned how to carry himself in the waiting areas, how to project an air of confidence even if nerves still flickered beneath the surface. He could spot other actors, some chatting animatedly, others sitting alone with headphones, each one hoping today might be their break. Denzel had hoped for that break so many times before. He knew the routine: walk in, deliver the lines, leave without much feedback. If they liked you, you'd hear back soon. If not, well, silence spoke volumes. He glanced down at the script pages in his hands, then closed his eyes, murmuring a quiet prayer. It was a habit now. Before each audition, before each step into the unknown, he offered it to God. It didn't always feel easy. No amount of faith could erase the sting of hearing no. But prayer had shifted something inside him. It wasn't about getting the role. It was about keeping his purpose intact. Denzel knew the world was going to say no many more times than yes. That's how the game worked. What mattered was not letting those no's define him. When his name was called, he stood, straightened his jacket, and walked into the audition room. The process was as familiar as breathing. A few greetings, a polite request to start, and then the performance. He hit every mark, delivered the lines with conviction, and then stood, calm and poised, as the casting director nodded politely and thanked him. And then it was over. Walking back out into the sunlight, Denzel paused on the steps of the building. He'd done his best, but something in the room hadn't clicked. He could feel it. The world's no was hanging in the air even before they officially told him. But instead of frustration, instead of anger, he felt something else: acceptance. He'd learned that he couldn't control their decision. What he could control was his preparation, his attitude, and his faith when he gave it to God. He wasn't asking for a guarantee of success. He was asking for the strength to stay the course. And even though he hadn't landed that role, he felt steady. Rejections no longer tore at him the way they once had. Each no was like a small pebble in his shoe, uncomfortable, sure, but not enough to stop him from walking forward. He kept repeating it to himself as he got in his car, as he drove back through the city. When the world says no, listen for God's yes. That yes wouldn't always come in the form he expected. It wouldn't always mean getting the job or landing the role. Sometimes, God's yes was the opportunity to learn, to grow, to keep pushing. One evening, after another long day, he sat at his kitchen table, reflecting on how far he'd come. The younger Denzel would have taken every rejection as a personal defeat. He would have questioned his talent, his dreams, his very path. But now, he saw the bigger picture. He saw the wisdom in the waiting. The no's weren't barriers, they were bridges to something greater. When the world says no, he whispered to himself, it doesn't mean it's over. It just means God's got something else in store. I just need to keep showing up, keep giving my best, and trust that I'm being led in the right direction. As the night deepened, Denzel felt a deep, abiding peace. The world might say no today. It might say no tomorrow. But in the end, it wasn't the world's opinion that mattered. It was the purpose that kept calling him forward, the faith that sustained him, and the promise that there was a greater yes waiting for him down the road. Years later, the lights dimmed in a grand theater as Denzel Washington stepped onto the stage to accept another prestigious award. The applause was deafening, echoing off the walls. And yet his first words weren't about the win. They weren't about the role he had played or the acclaim he had received. Instead, he started with a story. There was a time, he began, when I couldn't imagine this moment. A time when the doors just wouldn't open, when the world said no more times than I could count. But every single one of those no's, every rejection, every closed door was part of a bigger plan. I didn't see it back then. I didn't know how the pieces would fit together. But God did, and that's why I gave it all to Him. The audience hung on every word, captivated not by His fame, but by the undeniable sincerity of His voice. He recounted the quiet prayer at his mother's kitchen table, the long stretches of struggle, the valley of rejection he had walked through time and time again. And then he shared what kept him going, the promise that his efforts weren't in vain, that he wasn't alone, and that what was meant for him wouldn't miss him. I realized that success wasn't just about my hard work, he said. It wasn't just about my talent. It was about showing up with faith, even when things seemed impossible. It was about knowing that I wasn't in control of everything, and that was okay, because the one who is in control had a plan for me, something bigger. Something better than I could have dreamed up myself. He paused for a moment, looking out over the crowd. You see, I'm not here tonight because I never failed. I'm here because I learned to embrace the process, to trust that every obstacle, every setback, was preparing me for what was to come. I didn't have to know the outcome, I just had to keep moving forward, one step at a time. The audience nodded, some dabbing their eyes, others sitting a little straighter as his words resonated. And here's what I want you to know, he continued. When you give it to God, when you trust Him with everything, your dreams, your fears, your setbacks, you're not giving up. You're giving over. You're placing your future in the hands of the one who knows exactly where you're going, even when you can't see the road ahead. He smiled, a warm and genuine expression that carried no hint of arrogance, just gratitude. If you're sitting in your own valley of rejection, if the world is telling you no, I'm here to tell you that no is not the end. It's not your final chapter. Your journey isn't over just because you hit a roadblock. It's just part of the story. And if you keep walking in faith, you'll look back one day and see that every single step mattered. Every single challenge shaped you. And the doors that finally opened, they were the right ones all along. As the applause rose again, Denzel stepped back from the podium, nodding humbly, his words still hanging in the air. The promise he had spoken of wasn't just about his career. It was about purpose, about trust, about knowing that through all the twists and turns, the setbacks and the triumphs, there was a bigger plan, and that plan was always worth trusting.